Howard University, assistant professor at Howard University in the Educational Leadership and Policy Studies department. And I'm really excited to be here today about this panel, and I'm excited about this topic. We know that despite the increasing value placed on diversifying institutions in higher education, Black faculty continue to be significantly underrepresented in tenured faculty roles. Often Black faculty experience a devaluation of their scholarship, racial microaggressions in and outside of the classroom, disproportionate expectations to engage in service-related campus diversity initiatives and student mentoring, a lack of professional mentorship, and as well as feelings of isolation.
Go ahead and go back through all
this results in an environment that severely hinders retention and promotion of Black faculty, which not only continues to promote a toxic culture within the academy, but limits the kind of scholarship higher education produces, and it hinders the pipeline for creating more Black faculty. So today's discussion is very important. We want to engage in a critical dialogue about the unique experiences of Black faculty members within institutions of higher education in order to raise awareness, reflection, and promote action that will change the academy. The members of this panel will address the ways in which they navigated through the academy in their respective institutions. So our panelists today are very distinguished and accomplished, and we're really excited to have them. First, we have Dr. James Earl Jones, who's a professor of policy, organization, and leadership studies in the College of Education and Human Development at Temple University. His research focuses on gender and schooling outcomes, men, boys, and masculinity, sociology of higher education, and applied research methods. Next, we have Dr. Donna Ford, who's a distinguished professor of special education in the College of Education and Human Ecology at the Ohio State University. Her research focuses on the achievement gap, recruiting and retaining culturally different students in gifted education, multicultural curriculum and instruction, culturally competent teacher training and development, African American identity, and African American family involvement. Next, we have Dr. Fred Bonner, who is an executive director of the Minority Achievement, Creativity, and High Ability Center and a professor of education in the Department of Educational Leadership and Counseling at Prairie View and A&M University. His research focuses on academically gifted Black males, Black faculty in the academy, diverse faculty, minoritized persons in STEM, and college student and development. Next, we have Dr. Jennifer Johnson, who is an assistant professor of policy, organization, and leadership studies in the College of Education and Human Development at Temple University. Her research focuses on pre-college access programs, historically Black colleges and universities, students in science, technology, engineering, and math, and high-achieving students of color. And last and definitely not least, we have Dr. T. ELON DANCY, who is the Executive Director for the Center of Urban Education and an Associate Dean for Equity and Justice of the School of Education at the University of Pittsburgh. His research focuses on issues of access and equity in the educational pipeline as informed by race, gender, class, and other social political locations. So, without further ado, let's begin. Panelists, if you could address the first question, how would you best describe your overall experience within the academy as a Black faculty member?
Do we unmute ourselves? Okay.
Yes.
Well, thank you for putting this panel together. And this is a timeless and timely topic. We are in very dire straits socially as well as in the academy. But in terms of my experiences, I have to admit that mine have been very positive. And I set out early to try to do everything I could to mitigate the racism that, and especially anti-Blackness, that is prevalent in higher education. So I've spent my entire life trying to out-publish, out-talk, out-present, and outdo what is expected of whites, because we have to be better than, unfortunately.
This is James, and Dr. Jones, thanks for the introduction and thanks for the invitation to be a part of this critical, important panel. And I want to follow Dr. Ford around this question about experience in the academy. This idea of out-publishing, out-presenting, outworking your colleagues. It's one that Dr. Ford, you modeled for me. I remember opening the top tier journal, I think it's Ed Psychology once, and looking for relevant work. And I saw an article, you had the lead article in the journal, and you had another article in the journal. And I said, oh my God, she's amazing.
Oh, thank you.
And I said, it dawned on me what it would take to get 2 articles in the top tier journal at the same time, the kind of level of dedication and work and that it would require. But it also was a lesson for me as I was a junior faculty to think about the expectation and the responsibility of this role. So when you ask about my overall experience, that's actually my response is a day by day. So because it's evolving, it continues to change, it's dynamic. Because my experiences are informed, interesting, by my experiences. Let me explain a little bit. For me, experience in the academy, initially as a junior non-tenured faculty, is different, in some ways similar to my current, how I currently experience the academy. But it's all been shaped by my previous experiences. When I entered the academy over 20 years ago, I had more that experience of the only one. So I was the only Black faculty in my department. I was the only Black faculty in the college, and I was one of few Black faculty on campus. So that informed my experience in a certain way, and I was the first Black faculty to get tenure promoted in the college. So from the onset, it was so important for me to create intellectual networks that were outside of my my department or my collegiate or my university experience, and even mentors, invisible mentors like Dr. Ford, were there and were important for me to help me think about how to make this work. And just lastly, this idea of being the only one, while it's a burden for sure, but it's also a responsibility when they're where you may be the only Black faculty, but there are Black students that are looking to you to mentor and be a model.
So I'd love to follow up on these points if I may. I first want to begin in gratitude to the conversation organizers. Thanks so much for organizing us around this important topic and for inviting me to be a part of the panel. So as I think about the question, I think Harney and Moden's work, the Undercommons, really helps me to describe, I guess, an overall experience of being a Black faculty member, particularly in a historically white institution. And I think it's definitely in conversation with what Professor Davis and Professor Ford just said. But I like the framework of the commons and the undercommons as a way to frame my thoughts. So for me, it's beautiful in the undercommons. Like much of the work that I think that largely may go unrecognized, unseen by institutions is actually that which brings me the most joy. The learning groups, that I've been able to establish, the relationships with students, the moments that I've been able to identify that are truly connected to learning, not necessarily what is measured at the institution in terms of like teaching evaluations, but the actual moments of learning has been most beautiful for me. To be able to grapple with this praxis that Harney and Moden offer, to be in and not of the institution, I think is my guiding framework throughout my career. So I must admit, I have struggled in my thinking about what it means to be a Black person in a historically white institution. Questions about, am I participating in an institution that is working to uphold these anti-Black logics of the state? And I think for me, while I definitely, I can't get beyond a critique of participating, I am grappling with the praxis of being not of the institution, which means what is the work that may, quite frankly, go unrecognized, that is work that is valuing collective responsibility, that is valuing a critical notion of democracy, not just the one that we're seeing all around us. And that's been really exciting for me. So I guess I would just return to this notion of, I think James framed this as day by day. For me, it's both and. It's both beautiful and it's terrible. Like I find institutional logics really problematic, and we see the recomposition and we see the re-emergence of those over time. But I also find it a beautiful experience. As an academic, that's the space for me that allowed me to read, to be, scholarly reared in literature, to meet colleagues who became a part of a mentoring community for me, a part of a study group for me. So it is, it's both and.
Does anyone else want to answer that question? You don't all have to answer every question, so feel free to jump in when you want. Dr. Bonner, your mic's off. Your mic's off.
Okay, there we go. Okay, I am notorious for staying muted. My apologies. Definitely, I'll jump in. And I will say, kind of looking at my experiences in the academy holistically, I first want to start off by thanking the organizers for this important topic, bringing together this amazing group of scholars. These are my scholar friends. They've been my scholar friends for forever. Love them all. And I stand on the shoulders of giants. I mean, I look at, I'm gonna call them FD squared, Ford, Davis, DANCY. They all have contributed in clear and important ways to my scholarship, to who I am, to my identity. Just like Dr. Davis, Dr. Ford was one of the forerunners. Actually, the very first article that I had published, she gave me critical feedback, and she gave me a lot of feedback. So my very, very first article that was published was in the Journal of Black Studies, and Dr. Ford, she actually gave me critical feedback to really help me along. And flash forward, when I went up for full professor at Texas A&M, Dr. Davis, he was one of my external reviewers, so he has been right there as well. Dr. DANCY, any projects, presentations that I've asked him to participate in, he's always been a major force and a major supporter of the work that I'm doing. So we're kind of like brothers in the struggle together. And I'll tease the two of them. They're good men of Alpha Phi Alpha, so sidebar. I just want to say very briefly from my experience, I stand on the shoulders of giants, but I have always been about trying to tell a different story, a counter narrative to the narrative that has been out there about Black men in general, about Black scholars in particular. And my whole goal has been from the very, very beginning to move away from this deficit-based thinking that has so been pervasive of our experiences for people of color, for faculty of color, for communities of color. And I really wanted to zero in from the very, very initiation of my career. I decided that I am going to tell a counter narrative about what it means to be at the intersection of being Black, gifted, and male, because we never At that time, going all the way back to when I was in my doctoral program, finishing up in 1997, it wasn't a lot of research out there about what it meant to be Black, gifted, and male, particularly in post-secondary settings. So I said, you know, let me start this journey from a place of assets and potential, as opposed to deficits and derision. So holistically, that is what I try to do, whether I'm studying students, whether I'm looking at faculty, whether I'm looking at administrators, to really, really foreground a counter narrative that talks about assets.
Okay. Well, I'll ask the next question. To what extent, if any, has institutional racism impacted your experiences, particularly during the tenure and promotion process?
I will actually start that question as a junior faculty member at my institution and someone who will be going up for tenure and promotion in the coming years. These are definitely things that I think about a great deal. And so while I do have things to offer in terms of this conversation, I'm listening, I'm taking notes. And I appreciate the opportunity to be in community with my fellow panelists, as well as all of you all who have joined in today. Going back to the first question, I would also say that I've had an overall positive experience in the Academy as a faculty member. This is my 6th year as a faculty member, and I attribute that in many ways to having others have paved the path for me, so that some of the barriers, the challenges that have historically been faced by Black faculty are things that, one, I was aware that I would encounter, and also I have folks that are kind of pushing those out of the way for me. So one of the examples of that is that I have the privilege and opportunity to work with Dr. Davis at Temple University. And who knows to the extent to which there are things that could come my way that could impact my ability to move through the tenure and promotion process without any hiccups and challenges that don't even come to me because they might be kind of swatted out the way. And I recognize that is something that is happening. I know that I know that I'm just not that, phenomenal scholar where I'm not going to have any kind of challenges, and there's no one going to be, questioning my research and things of that nature, because there are people that have already been like, nope, we're going to talk about this work from an anti-deficit lens. We're not going to, constantly norm the values of historically Black colleges and universities on a white model. We're not going to kind of talk about Black women as being this model for success without also talking about the challenges and institutional barriers that they face as well. And so because of those previous models, one, I can reference them in my journey, and I also can be better prepared to have the language and have the tools to be able to kind of say, nope, because, well, Dr. DANCY did this study that also found these very same instances of institutional racism really structurally compounding some of these issues. And Dr. Ford and Dr. Bonner have been talking about the gifted spaces for quite a long time. And so when I say that we're going to talk from an anti-deficit framework, see their work. And so I think that has really helped, and I do the best that I can to acknowledge that pathway that I'm following to move forward in my tenure and promotion process.
Did anyone else want to talk about how institutional racism has affected their experience of the Academy?
Dr. Jones, I would like to make a point that's personally related, but also more broadly. sort of understood, that the tenure and promotion process or processes are informed by a history of exclusion and elitism. The academy traditionally is based on allocations of status and prestige, and promotion and tenure was the kind of historically the principal mechanism to make that happen. As I think as we've seen shifts in generations of Black scholars move through the academy, first generation Black scholars, because of the how promotion and tenure is understood, the kind of work, particularly it was based in Black populations, the work, the scholarship was invisible, illegible, and because of how the academy understood what scholarship is. So that wasn't even considered scholarship, and it was sort of evaluated by people who held those values. So early generations, first generations of Black scholars, it was sort of extremely difficult, particularly if you were focusing on issues of the conditions of Black people. While it's true, second and third generations of Black scholars, there are more in the academy, but there's still levels of illegibility and visibility, particularly about sort of critical race work, if you will. So that struggle continues, and promotion and tenure is still in place in some ways to marginalize that, even with more Black scholars evaluating promotion and tenure applications. I have more to say about that later, where the sort of institutional racism has sort of is still dominant and often sort of replaced the players and the gatekeepers in ways that that surprise many of us. And we can talk more about that.
I love that, because you're focusing on how institutional racism isn't about necessarily bodies, but it's an ideology, and that anyone can perpetuate it, especially if they aren't critical. So yeah, thank you for saying that.
You know, I want to say to the participants, don't take, and I'll speak for myself, my initial silence as anything other than with that last question about what have I faced in particular. I want you to understand that my silence does not mean that I have not faced discrimination and racism. It is how you cope with it, and then how you set yourself up to overcome the discrimination that exists in terms of when it comes to promotion and tenure, you know, the scholarly aspect, what criticism will come, your line of research may be critiqued, the topic, the population, for example, where you published, as Dr. James Earl Davis mentioned earlier, where you published is never good enough. Because you didn't get into the top tier journal. And the reality is many times, not sometimes, many damn times, you cannot get in these top tier journals because of the racism that exists. And then we publish in our Black journals, our urban journals, our multicultural journals, and then that gets critiqued as not having enough impact, when in reality, they might be the top ones in our field and the only place we can publish. Dr. Fred Bonner's heard me say this before. I got the DONNA from Cleveland or down from East Cleveland version of what I'm going to write about, and I'll go ahead and put it in the Black journals. And then I got the Dr. Forward from XYZ University that I'll publish, and where I got to be a little bit more nice. But I got to get the information out to them. So we are bombarded with barriers. Yet again, there are ways to overcome this, and we have enough time to talk about that. Then in the teaching, if you talk, no matter what you talk about, just because of your skin color. For example, you will be given lower teaching evaluations. You've got to find a way to defend those lower evaluations, which are so subjective and more. And then we have, you know, service, where we have to compete for professional development and more. So for me, again, I have not really faced a lot of discrimination. My personality won't allow people to come and mess with me. I was going to slip up. I didn't say it, but I'm not taking that mess from anybody.
Right.
And I will let you know exactly how to, you know what I feel about you, and you won't come after me again. And I want us to position ourselves in a way that we can do that. Of course, your personality has to come into play. Last, I'm gonna say, because I've been successful in the academy along with other panelists, and you know, even those listening, I have wanted to share my strategies, my resources, and I created what's called Race Mentoring, a Facebook group, research, advocacy, collaboration, empowerment. And it is for us, by us, people of color, so we can have these conversations in this space that really let us dig into what we face and more.
That address, the web link to that group?
I will try to find out how to put that in the chat box, but it's Race, RACE Mentoring.
That's awesome. Thank you.
If I can just really quickly add on to that last point, Dr. Ford, in terms of your race mentoring group, one of the things to be very clear about that group is that as a for us, by us entity, that you are expected to contribute just as much as you receive. And Dr. Ford will kick you off of that group. You are not, and I got kicked off once, but I'm like, wait, no, I think it was an accident. I was contributing. But she's very serious, and the team of kind of mentors that monitor that are very serious about creating that space, not just as a fat Facebook platform, but really a space for collaboration, a space for commiseration, sharing of resources, and things of that nature. So Dr. Ford, I'll also put it in the chat, and folks can maybe get that link and get involved.
Thank you so much.
So Sonia, if there's time, I'd love to be in conversation with these points too. Do we have time?
Yeah, definitely. Go ahead, please.
Oh, okay, great. So as I listen to Dr. Ford, so there's two reactions that I have. One is I'm still grieving what it means that Dr. Ford has to publish work in some venues that may be work that she feels is most aligned to the, I don't know, the justice politic, the freedom politic, the kind of collective responsibility concerns that she's really passionate about, but then, and also has to publish in other places in order to try to satisfy the kind of meritocracy logics of institutions. Like that, in my mind, is indicative of racism or institutions as anti-Black. Like how many of our colleagues are actually working through that kind of duality in their publication scope of work, and I know we've all had to sort of make those conversations as we navigate these processes. And as I think about the question, I want to return to this idea of meritocracy, because I think meritocracy is for me a way that I can talk about anti-Blackness and racism as I think I've experienced it, as I've witnessed it, as I continue to witness it as someone who is at tenure and promotion tables, and quite frankly, always re-traumatized whenever there are not only Black scholars for whom really problematic questions of merit and quality get raised, but even when Black people are not, even when Black people's work are not being evaluated, but those same logics in terms of what is meritorious and what is quality, I know work to the detriment of Black people and Black scholarship. And I think meritocracy, we can think about that in terms of tenure promotion. We also see it in hiring processes around fit and around strengths, or however we're engaging the work of selectivity, award processes, annual review processes. There are always critiques, I think, that I consider to be careless, questions that go to this sort of invention of merit. But usually what I found is they actually have nothing to do with the ideas themselves. They tend to be concerned with the style, right, or the aesthetic really of a vita, but never the ideas, because I'm not sure that many of our colleagues are actually investing much brain space in what we have to say about justice or about minoritized populations. But I do often hear lots of questions about where something is published, what foundation, how much money, how prestigious it is, all of which I think are unfair and critical assessments of Black merit. So, and the questions that I think get asked under the guise of objectivity, but are not objective. So do they have enough grant money? Well, how much money should they have? How much money should they have for that research agenda, for those kinds of questions? What are the histories of these foundations? What have they typically funded? Lots of questions that would need to be brought to any sort of serious deliberation about that. When I actually think those conversations are distracting and dangerous, quite frankly, have operated dangerously for Black people, Black academics. And there are a number of cases that, we've been reading about in this year alone, really prominent cases of denial of tenure with really flimsy logics of merit. And I think what I might say about teaching evaluations too, this is very important. And so, teaching evaluations continue to persist in many tenure promotion processes, even though we know they're not objective. They don't measure learning, and they're probably, measures of satisfaction, which in the neoliberal institution is based on all kinds of market-based logics and are particularly unreliable for Black people and Black women, moreover. And, usually they respond to all sort of fetishes and stereotypes about Black people. Ebony McGee's work did the students feel entertained by their Black professors.
That was written about me, but changed to a male.
Get out.
Yes.
So there you go. So there you go. And but I must say, I did the bulk of my teaching at my previous institution, and in this really almost like a neoconservative sort of context, I had really high teaching evaluations. And I'm not saying that to brag. Actually, it used to frustrate me because I used to wonder, what was I doing wrong? I can't be doing anything for the people, by the people, with the people, if these white students in Oklahoma, many of whom had never even heard of the Tulsa Race Massacre, were finding my courses appealing. And then they, a couple of years later, they hired a Black woman, and she had really, really low scores. But we had similar pedagogical styles. And I think what I was what it was important for me to do, one was to have a critique of gender and patriarchy, but two, to resist the lure of lending credence, if you will, to teaching evaluations. So just because mine are high, it's very important for me in that moment as a good colleague to still recognize that they're unreliable, and to, in order to be in solidarity with this Black woman faculty member whose teaching evaluations were low and existing low at the intersections of racism and sexism. So I share that as an example, not because it's something that happened to me, but because it's something that I witnessed with a colleague. And I have to make decisions not in the interest of the individual, but in the interest of a collective.
Before,
Okay.
oh, I'm sorry. Before we move forward, let me say this to to those who are listening in. You cannot run from racism.
That's true.
There's no damn place to hide. There's no place to run. You know, there's just no place. So as you listen to us talk, as you think about the challenges you have faced and that you will face, let's just keep it real. If you're in the Peter 12 system, you're gonna face damn racism. If you're in the music industry, wherever, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm getting heated. Wherever it is, you're gonna face it. If you, and let's use Joe Biden, want to be Dr. somebody, then you do it, and we're gonna find a way to make that happen. You're gonna face these hurdles just as you would in any other context, and you're gonna keep pushing forward because your goal is to be Dr., you know, whatever your last name is, okay? If this is your dream, then you have to keep making these connections for it to happen. You have to, unfortunately, deal with these double and triple standards, all right? Which you just talked about, mentioned, you know, in terms of how painful that is. But I mean, where do you not have to deal with it? When I was growing up, my mother said, you have to work twice as hard to get half of what they do. So I don't care what industry you're in, that's just reality. So decide that you want to be in higher education, and then start planning to face these barriers in order to be successful in spite of. And I think that's the same you have to do in all the other professions. But I'm telling you, promotion and tenure is a great damn thing. It is great. And being called doctor really feels good. Feels fantastic.
That, Dr. Ford, and what Dr. Dancy said, I'm wondering, is there a space? Because I mean, how do we, once we achieve these legitimizer markers like tenure and promotion, or we get that big grant, or you know, we're published in a top tier publication, how do we make space for others and start to change the academy so we don't have to kill ourselves to survive? How do we begin to make that change?
Mm-hmm. That question, that's for me, SOSANYA?
It's for anybody, but yes.
Okay, sure. So, one is, I think it's important to realize that process will not result in a complete overhaul overnight. But I think maybe I can respond from my position as associate dean, a position that I've been in only recently at the University of Pittsburgh, but I also held that position at the University of Oklahoma. And what we're doing at that university is organizing study groups that are supported and resourced from the School of Education. Study groups we're drawing from the Black radical tradition. And we're having the kinds of conversations that we're having right here, choosing readings. For instance, we've asked the faculty to sit with Ta-Nehisi Coates' lecture at Harvard University to help us understand universities as themselves as sites of plunder, and to ask questions such as how might our student admissions processes and our tenure and promotion processes actually serve as sites of plunder. So it's actually important not for a sort of individual Black faculty member to do that only. It's really a site of, I think, over labor. I mean, we're already heavily burdened, and to do that is certainly a gift to the institution. But it's also important for a larger collective. So maybe to think I think there are multiple ways to take this up, but it's an opportunity to think about strategies and tactics that can be sustained across schools of education and across departments where faculty have to do the work of deep study around equity and justice and how they relate to tenure promotion processes. And I also think there needs to be some advocacy for how resources are distributed in departments too. So usually, you know, within these systems, within racial capitalist systems, people who already come from situations of advantage tend to also be advantaged. This is the case even with academics in terms of who gets into what journal, who gets large grants to do a particular kind of work. And so, you know, questions that we're beginning to grapple with now, even in my current institution, is how might we distribute resources in the department in ways that respond more to our reparative needs, the idea that we need to be repairing plunder, the idea of needing to socialize resources, not notions of merit, but maybe notions of need in the department and how those might show up. So I think that that's heavy work. I think if there are few of us in the department, we have to be strategic, constantly studying, working, you know, within groups that are concerned with collective responsibility, and also advocating for sure for departments and for, you know, academic units in schools to be doing that kind of work.
I was just going to say that historically, what I have tried to do, going back to 2006, I had an article that came out of the Chronicle of Higher Education called Black Faculty on the Track but Out of the Loop. And that article, I talked about how Black faculty in predominantly white spaces compared to their white counterparts are many times in two totally different worlds, particularly when it comes to engagements with students, engagements with administration, engagement with the university writ large, tenure and promotion processes. And I had a couple of themes, and flash forward to 2016, AFT Voices actually published an article. It was kind of like a reprisal of that 2006 article. And I titled this one, The Unbearable Whiteness of Teaching. And that 2016 article, I talked about how those very same themes, I have everything to prove, how Black faculty have to prove over and over again their competence, where it's just assumed, kind of fait accompli, that their white colleagues, they have the requisite competencies to stand there before their classes and pontificate for 3 hours. But there's never this feeling that Black faculty have that type of intellectual capital or largesse to be able to just command a 3-hour classroom space without having a bunch of actual accoutrements, PowerPoints or notes or different things. I talked about how difficulty logging into the network, how many times for faculty of color, when we show up at the meeting and we're engaging in having discourse about what's best for the department, what's best for students, we're many times under the assumption that, you know, those conversations are happening for the very first time right there at the table with your colleagues. When in actuality, many of those conversations among white faculty occur in their social spaces. They occur on the golf course, they occur on the tennis court. So that whole networking thing, you know, is really imbalanced when it comes to the participation of faculty of color many times. And the themes kind of go on and on and on. I talked about it's only my stream of double consciousness, where Black faculty feel like they have to put their intellectual and their private selves on the shelf every time they enter the academics, that they don't get to come and show up and just be authentically who they are. It is always some type of performative thing that they have to do to play the role or run the role of faculty. So those themes played out in 2006 in the Chronicle article. They played out in the Unbearable Whiteness of Teaching in 2016. So I would say that's a very, very important point to kind of start with, recognizing and unpacking how we live in a tale of two different cities. That's really important for the academy to understand, that the relative experiences, the qualitative experiences that Black faculty have can be diametrically opposed to what white faculty are going through. Another thing that I want to say, going all the way back to when I was, right before I finished my doctoral program, summer 1996, Dr. Ron Rochon, who's now a college president, he was heading this program at Washington State University. And I went out there and spent a summer. And one of my main mentors was Dr. Etta Hollins. And I can remember Dr. Hollins telling us some of the best advice that I got from her. She said, as scholars of color, you always have to tell your own story. You got to get ahead of the narrative. And that is what I have tried to do across my career, is getting ahead of the narrative. You don't get the opportunity to tell my story. You don't get to frame for me what my research agenda is and what it means and how it's contextualized in the academy. I tell that story. So we as scholars, and what I try to share with all my peers, all my mentors, mentees, and those who I advise about the academic journey or the professional journey is that you got to tell your own story. You got to tell your own story. Very, very critical. And after you tell your own story, and to your point, the last question that you asked, what I have tried to do, I don't sit around and wait for white folks to give me opportunities now. And thank God I have reached a point to be a senior scholar that I am at the point now where I can create opportunities for junior scholars. So I don't wait for the white folks to tell me that what I'm doing is peer reviewed and acceptable. I mean, there was a time that I went through the tenure and promotion process just like everyone else, and I struggled and I got the rejections and I had to go through. But now as a senior scholar, I'm like, nah, I'm not doing that anymore. So what I did was, thank God I have such a dynamic president, President Ruth Simmons. She told me, she said, one of the things, since you have your own center, why don't you get your own journal? And I want you to get a journal with a very good press. She said, I want you to get a journal with an academic press. So I started the process. I had conversations with Fordham, which got positive feedback from them. Michigan State got positive feedback from them. And I settled on Penn State University. So now I have my own journal. And I encourage all of you out there in cyberspace to send me those articles. It's the Journal of Minority Achievement, Creativity, and Leadership, JMACL, Minority Achievement, Creativity, and Leadership. That's one thing that I did. A second thing that I did was I said, you know what? I'm going to work towards getting my own book series because I want to have scholars to be able to publish the work that's for us and about us. Therefore, I went to Routledge Press. And again, I know the dynamics and the gymnastics that you play with. You want the top tier publishers, you want the top tier presses. So I said, let me go to one of the highest of the high. So I went to Routledge and I spent, it was 2.5 years going back and forth, but finally landed a book series. So I have a book series with Routledge, Diverse Faculty in the Academy. And so far, I'm really excited. 3 days ago, just commissioned my third book in my series. Natasha Kroon, Krista Porter, Thandi Sule. So their book is on Black women epistemology, faculty. I'm gonna mess up the title, but anyway, Black women epistemology research. The second title that was accepted about 2 months ago is our good colleague, Dr. Sharon Fries-Britt. Sharon Fries-Britt and Bridget Turner-Kelly. They have a book on Black women in mentoring. And my very, very first book accepted for my series was Nicholas Daniel Hartlip, Racial Battle Fatigue in Faculty. And what is really cool about his book is that it doesn't just look at Black faculty, it comes from the perspective of racial battle fatigue and how Asian American faculty are impacted. So I say all that to say that what we can do, what we're supposed to do, to your point, to your question about once you get tenure and promotion, you got to reach that hand back and you got to set up opportunities. You can't sit around and wait on white folks. We have the potential. We have this wonderful diaspora just right here. James, you're sitting here with James Earl Davis. You're sitting here with ELON DANCY, with Donna Ford. All of us have connections and resources. We're connected to James Moore, Chance Lewis. We're connected to Cynthia Tyson, Judy Alston. So establish those networks and just make it happen.
Before you were going to say something.
Yeah, and again, that's why I co-created, Race Mentoring, which we finally call RM. We have webinars where we talk about publishing, publish not perish. And this is for students as well, not just faculty. We have webinars on creating a CV. It's unfortunate that some of us don't know the difference between a resume and a CV. We have webinars on creating a schema to keep you focused, or my word is focused, which is focused and organized. There are webinars on consulting. How much do you charge? What would your rate be? How do you negotiate a contract, etc.? how do you put together a powerful presentation, be a keynote or, the Mac keynote or PowerPoint, whichever, platform you use. I mean, like what technology do you use? For example, and Dr. Venus Evans Winters won't mind me saying this because she shared it. One time I saw Dr. V presenting and she was telling someone, next slide, next slide, next slide. And I'm like, you don't let no damn body control your slides. First of all, you don't know what they're doing with your slides, after you give it to them. So nobody gets my presentation. So I was like, you don't let anybody control your slides. And I said, it's annoying to keep hearing next slide. I said, go and get one of those remote presenters. Mm-hmm. And you push forward and backwards and highlight those kinds of things. And she's like, that changed my whole presentation. I look more confident. I can walk the stage. I can walk the audience. I can go into the crowd, etc. So, I mean, a little tip like get a presenter, right? And then I'll share which ones I like from, how much they cost and pros and cons of each, etc. It drives me bonkers when I see somebody do a presentation where the background is white and your font is yellow. I can't see that stuff. I'm looking at you, James. I can't make that out. I mean, what is that saying? Or, what about looking at the color contrast wheel? Mm-hmm. All right, so that it pops. I'm up here in age. I can't see your little 14 size font from 500 feet away. I'm exaggerating, right? But what should that minimum size font be? And more. When you do a presentation, like if you were to go to Dr. Bonner's place, okay, I see the purple and yellow. Well, damn, put a little purple and yellow in that presentation. You don't have to be too obvious, right? Or, maybe put on a purple tie or something to indicate that, they know where you at, or where you're at. There are certain things that you just have to do. And I saw somebody at a university, I was going to say the name, but let me stop. A white man do interview in what looked like damn pajamas and still get the position. You better not even think about it. You better come out in your best outfit for your doctoral presentation, for your job talk, for your you name what. We cannot get away with that. And it's not selling out. It's not kissing behind. This is what we do to get what we want. And then we get promotion and tenure, and then we continue to do it, and then we give back. And never forget whose shoulders you climbed on. I can't tell you the number of times I've been burned by Black people that I helped. And when they make it, they don't remember down for it. That's another thing. Stop that stuff. Stop it. It is so disrespectful, so wrong. We got to deal with racism, and then we got to deal with Negro pants too. All right, let me stop. I could go on, but I'm just saying we have to be true to ourselves, be true to the research, be true to each other. And when we do this, and when we study them to outperform them, then we have a higher probability of being successful. But we damn sure don't need to be dealing with our skin folk, right? Who are not authentically Black or people of color.
So
I've never been at an HBCU, never have, but don't act like it's perfect there either.
Right.
So I just probably lost a few friends.
Nobody would make that claim, Dr. Ford. That actually is a perfect transition for one of our audience questions. A person from the audience asked, they'd love to hear from panelists about their experience with non-Black people of color in the academy as Black faculty. Have non-Black people of color been allies or in solidarity with you, or acted as additional roadblocks or manifestations of anti-Blackness and white supremacy?
They haven't messed with me. That doesn't mean they haven't done it to others, but I would say have been allies, because one thing we cannot do is get into oppression Olympics. So we have to have a collective persona and way of doing things so that we're in collaboration, not competition. So in unity, then we can better overcome.
If I can kind of build on that and going back to the previous question, I think it comes down to thinking about the performative nature of faculty life and even the performative nature of navigating the academy as a master's student, as a graduate student. And one of the sentiments shared earlier is that, you know, change does not happen overnight. And to the earlier question of what folks will do with tenure, you know, how are you making space? How are you making room? From my vantage point as someone who does not have tenure, that doesn't start just because you have tenure. That doesn't start just because you go into, you're either about that life or you're not. And it's easy to kind of pick up on those notions early on. If you're a graduate student who monopolizes on opportunities and, you know, steals ideas, you're going to be a faculty member that steals ideas. You're going to be a tenured faculty member that steals ideas. That will not change. And so in thinking about these collectives and these communities that you're building, they start now and they continue. And then as you have more access to resources, you can continue to you know, share those resources in different kinds of ways. But just because I don't have tenure does not mean that I do not feel an obligation to promote opportunities, create spaces, share resources in ways that are authentic to who I am as a person and who I am as a scholar. And so I think one of the frustrations that I have in the academy is trying to work with others who don't have that mentality, or who really have that mentality and feel like because the competition that they're feeling in their graduate program, I don't want to be a faculty member. I don't want to go through this. I don't want to do this. It's not for me. It is exactly for you, but there's different spaces and ways that you can do this work. I've worked as a faculty member at two institutions, two very different types of institutions, in terms of the makeup of faculty, the allocations of resources, and just kind of the roles and responsibilities. And I think that that's another thing that we need to think about if we want to do this work. Is it that the conditions in which I'm doing this work now is not conducive to the kind of scholar I want to be? Or are there other spaces that you can kind of be more free and have the resources and wield the resources and networks to make the kind of changes that we want to do, which is the reason why we're doing this work. So I just want to reiterate just that performative nature of faculty life. I think it's getting worse with social media and folks kind of presenting even more public persona of themselves. But what I can say at least about the folks on this panel is that the folks that have showed up for the webinar today are the folks that show up in these same kinds of ways in like real life. But unfortunately, that is not always the case. So just be mindful of that as you think about who you're networking with, who you're working with, who you're collaborating with, so that you're not surprised when that person doesn't reciprocate.
Let me give you part B to that, and thanks so much for what you just said. And I'm gonna try to be brief, but part B to what you said is this, and I hope this analogy works. The DONNA you meet on day one, you will not 5 days later or a year later, like, oh, I didn't know you were like that. So I'm gonna use a dating analogy. When I'm dating someone, when someone wants to date me, from day one, you know I curse, you know I got a temper, you know, I'm gonna tear you off. You know, my favorite color is red. You know, what you're gonna know, you know that family is important and that you probably won't come before my family. All right. So you got to know that. So when I am, when it comes to just any career, you know, applying for a doctoral program, applying for a faculty position, when I do my job talk, I am Donna. I'm just who I am. And I'm going to use the word racism in my presentation. And I'm going to mention and state over and over again, anti-Blackness, etc. So that you won't be surprised, like, well, you didn't really talk about that during your job talk and during your interview. Yes, yes, I did. You knew from my talk and from my letter of application exactly what you were going to be getting. And so that helps, I believe, to put you in a better position to be successful because they know who they just hired or brought in as a doc student, postdoc, etc.
Great. So we have another audience question. One of the audience members says, I'm curious to hear from the panelists how they encountered challenges they did not expect and how they navigated those experiences. I have always heard that the academy and faculty world can be very political. So I would love to hear from the panelists speak truth to this.
Thanks for that question. It's an understatement to say that the academy is political. It's hyper political. If you think about political being informed about power dynamics, clearly the case. And I know we have a lot of participants today who are either doc students or emerging academics and considering academic careers. And I would like to encourage you to do so, but with kind of fullness of mind about the nature of the work. As Dr. Johnson said, the kind of the performative aspects of being in the academy. I think we're often fooled now by kind of the polished presentation of faculty life via social media. And it can be very deceptive and alluring, but not completely honest about the nature of this work and the experience of this work. And I've tried sort of through my career to share sort of major kind of life lessons about the, as DANCY would say, the beauty and the terribleness of the academy, and how that informs the way that we move and think about and resist and but also contribute and make lifelong friends and love in those settings. But one of those lifelong lessons I like to share is that particularly as it's helpful in navigating the academy as you come in or as you're going through, is that the academy has an insane way of making or constructing your strengths as your weaknesses. For instance, like if you're a great instructor, the academy tells you that you must be neglecting your research. If you're a prodigious scholar, highly productive, the academy tells you, well, you don't care about teaching or you're antisocial. If you're highly collaborative with students and with colleagues and in work groups, the academy says that you're not independent enough. If you're too independent, the academy says you're not collaborative enough. In other words, while the academy expects you to be singular and unidimensional in your contributions, the academy also expects you to be multidimensional, multifaceted. And that's the kind of schizophrenia, if you will, of the institution that's informed by a kind of history of exclusion, as I said earlier, of a history of promoting excellence in such a narrow, awful kind of way. But there are ways that we can sort of combat that, sort of provide an antidote, if you will, for that part of the academy that constructs your strengths as weaknesses. One, I said, one of the antidotes is that you need to know who you are, like internally at your core, not about your research, not about your interests, but at your human core, who you are. That's not informed externally by the academy.
Dr. Davis, I absolutely agree with what you're saying. I just want to add a little piece in there, because what you're saying is exactly what I was kind of taking a few notes over here. And I was like, oh my gosh. I can remember going back to, I was a postdoc for 2 summers in Robert Sternberg's lab at Yale University. And I can remember, oh my gosh, us postdocs going in there, oh my gosh, this is Yale, this is Sternberg, bow at the feet. And I can remember one of the very first conversations that I had with him, he was kind of wanting to know about my perspective on going into academia. Here it is, young scholar, just finished your doctorate, you're here as a postdoc, well, what do you have to say about who you are and what you plan on doing in the academy? And I can remember just as clearly with my 27-year-old self saying to him, one thing that I have always learned from my parents and from my grandparents is that if you arrive in pieces, it's hard to depart whole. So I am already a whole person. So I plan in operationalizing all of who I am. I said, I might get it wrong sometimes, but at the end of the day, I'm going to be authentically me. And I know that was a bold statement. I mean, way back then, but hey, I was young and dumb, 27, so why not? I'm talking to Robert Sternberg, but hey, I'm Fred Bonner. So I am trying to come to this thing being all of my country, East Texas self, all of my undergraduate chemistry major self, all of my, all of who I am is very, very important. So I can just always remember my folks telling me, if you arrive in pieces, you won't depart whole. And one thing that I try to share, I've been unwritten by Thurgood Marshall, and also I've done it for Prairie View here. President Simmons had me. There's this workshop I constructed way back when I was Associate Dean of Faculties at Texas A&M University. And it's called Framing and Maintaining a Research Agenda. And I literally just finished doing a 2-day cycle with the University of South Alabama. But I've done this workshop for several different institutions. And it's showing faculty how to frame and maintain a cogent, precise, and concise research agenda. And one of the things that I talk about in that workshop, I talk to those who are looking to move from assistant to associate and associate to full. And I said, for many times for faculty, one of the things, we get it twisted. We don't understand that things that you do to go from assistant to associate and associate to full, they're 2 different phases. And I can remember when I was associate dean going out dealing with 65 departments across Texas A&M. And I can remember the provost saying this to faculty, and a lot of them saying, well, what does she mean by that? I said, well, let me break it down. The things that you did to go from assistant to associate, at that point in your career, phase 1, you want to show that you can do independent and collaborative research. And the way you do that is through peer-reviewed journal articles, and a whole bunch of them if you can. If you can do 1,000, do 1,000, because you want to show that you can do independent and collaborative research. But a lot of people get it twisted. They think once they get associate and to become full, I just do those very same things on steroids. That is not what you do. Now, in phase 2 of your career, you're trying to show that you have a national and international reputation. We got the memo. We know you can do articles, you can do peer-reviewed articles, you can write book chapters. To show that you have a national, international reputation, you do that through books, invited talks, you do it through major grants. So I say all that to say that a lot of times for faculty in general, not just faculty of color, all faculty, I see this with white folks too. You have to understand and get somebody to sit down and talk to you. You got to talk to a Donna Ford or James or Davis or ELON DANCY about the rules of engagement. to understand, and Dr. Jennifer Johnson, how you play the game, truly understand, talk to those department chairs, talk to those deans, to really get an understanding of what the rules of engagement are. And you play it to the best of your ability from a standpoint of authenticity, of being exactly who you are.
And you need to have this attitude of, you need me too. So Dr. Bonner, I am looking at an email from Robert Sternberg right now, because we just got an article published together.
Wow.
All right. So, I mean, it's just coming in. I mean, so here you are talking about him, and I'm looking up here to the side and I see this. That article, and I'm gonna say it, would not have been, probably couldn't have been published without my damn input too. It's just not, I needed Sternberg. I just mean fill in the blank. I'm building on what you said. It's like, you need me too. You must have confidence. Mm-hmm. And you must know that you can fill a void. There's only one of you. What do you want to focus on? What legacy do you want to leave? And you focus on that. You stay focused on that. Don't let anyone detract you, derail you. Keep doing it so that you become number one in that particular area, and then people reach out to you. So, earlier you mentioned, a few minutes ago, you mentioned, and you did too, Dancy, about, promotion and tenure and beginnings of a national reputation or international. When people start inviting you to do things, then that is an indication that you have a national or beginning of a national reputation, and you keep that information and you file it away, and it helps with promotion and tenure. So these strategies, I mean, those little tidbits of information, like if somebody invites you to keynote, you better make sure you keep that email, that paper trail. If they invite you to co-author a publication, and I keep saying the word invite, it speaks volumes, and that's not something that's necessarily going to show up in other places. You, with humility, but also with confidence, have to. Anyway, what comes to mind when I'm rushing is, sell yourself and be your best advocate to communicate who you are and why you are so important. Not egotistically, not with ego, but with confidence.
You're absolutely.
Sonya, could I make a quick point?
Yeah.
So Sonya, I want to check in with the time.
No, go ahead, please.
I just want to say quickly, across these three conversations, what I'm taking away that I think is so important is the idea of focus and doing your work in a context that is full of distraction and moving the goalposts. So like when James talks about this idea of the institution constructing your strengths as weaknesses, that feels to me like the conversation Toni Morrison was having with us in 1975, this great Portland State University lecture, which is a critique of the university, where she talks about how the institution tells you that you have no language, and you spend all this time trying to prove that you do have a language. They tell you that your skull is bigger, that's why you can't learn as well. So you spend all this time trying to prove, trying to meet these expectations that are actually not grounded in anything objective or anything natural. They are themselves inventions. And she frames that in terms of distraction from doing your work. And so I do want to say that in order to experience anything sort of close to joy or success, it's important to do our work. And I just want to encourage, research agendas, teaching and scholarship that are concerned with, critical responsibility, collective, critical consciousness and collective responsibility, because otherwise people will you'll find colleagues might confuse you so much, you may not know what you're supposed to be doing. What can be helpful, I think, as a tip here is take a look at department norms. So when you're hired at an institution, and one of my mentors told me this, look at your colleagues, and when they are tenured, look at what they've published, look at where they published. That can give you a sense of norms, right? Without having to talk to too many people who have their own ideas about what is meritorious work. You'll find some people telling you, focus only on journals. Some people tell you do less of this, get more grants. Some people, you won't know what to do with yourself. But if you take a look at the vitas of the faculty across the department and take a look at when they were tenured, that will give you a good sense of norms. Then you determine what is important to you that drives the research agenda, where you can be productive in many ways, paying attention to those norms and ignore, a bunch of noise.
DANCY, you're absolutely right. In addition to knowing who you are, as you said, you need to know sort of what you are, what's your scholarly identity, what fields of contribution, what's your theoretical contribution, what's your empirical contribution. And lastly, you need to know kind of whose you are. Like, what is the community that you're connected with? What community raises your consciousness? What communities kind of nurtures you sort of intellectually, if you will? Who are your networks? Who are your ride or die? Who are your boys? Who are your girls? Who will support you? Who will believe in your ideas? Who will believe in your contributions? And who would love you unconditionally? So knowing who you are, what you are, and whose you are kind of those takeaways that I wanted to share.
I love this because I think so often, particularly for graduate students who are socialized in this toxic academy, you're told to chase these carrots, right? And sometimes the carrots are attached to scholarly endeavors that have nothing to do with your passion. And so people feel almost split, like they have to make these choices about tucking away parts of themselves to even just get their foot in the door. And they say, oh, I'll do what I want to do once I get tenure. But that never happens, because the more you do scholarship on things outside of yourself, the more opportunities you'll get for scholarship that has nothing to do with the things you love. And so this is such an important message, that if you can do some self-reflection and assessment about what do I really want to do, and stick to it and find a community that nurtures that. I mean, to me, you guys have preached the word. I really appreciate this message. I'm going to leave with one last question. In your view, what are the long-term consequences if institutions of higher education continue to ignore the needs of Black faculty members?
Well, I think I have a reaction to that, SOSANYA, so I'm happy to begin. And it's an interesting question. So I think we should assume that universities are going to continue to disregard Black faculty members because there's nothing historically that has suggested any differently. And like anti-Blackness in logics, in material realities, we have to confront that those logics really do power the institution. And much of what we're doing, that is akin to, surviving, thriving, happens within those contexts. And so I think it's important, in that question to recognize that they're going to continue to disregard Blackness, because that's important for institutional identity, right? And it's inherent in all of these, logics of meritocracy, logics of resources that we've been talking about. And I'm actually really concerned about the consequences for Black people that will have an effect on everyone, even if it's psychologically, if institutions don't do the serious, deep work of grappling with what I've framed here as active plunder, right? And it's important here, like as I think about the absence of Black people largely from colleges and universities, I think about that as active colonial plunder, as active anti-Black plunder. I think about these conversations we're having at tenure tables about, Black people, the Black body, Black scholarship, as forms of plunder. And I'm quite frankly worried about what I have been seeing playing out in the national media. I have seen all kinds of harms coming from Black students, coming from Black faculty and Black staff. We have to confront, even though this is a conversation about tenure and promotion, that most Black faculty within, historically white institutions are not even on the tenure track. Like they're adjuncts, a non-tenure track. And that, we have to think about what that means for living wages. It may not even be a living wage, for access to healthcare, within environments in which Black people already have, a little to no generational wealth whatsoever. So these are also characteristics of a crumbling empire. And that has what we're seeing, the election of Trump and all of this foolishness that I think we're seeing playing out, on sort of a governmental stage. They are, I think, talking to us about articulating that the empire is crumbling, and that implicates colleges and universities. And I think we can look at many indicators. We can look at institutional financial models, narratives of austerity and scarcity, that resources are never available for or less available for socially responsible kinds of programs, but always available for work that is individualistic, that is capitalist, et cetera. The absence of Black faculty and Black students, which I've mentioned, the active erasure of knowledge traditions, the racial capitalism of Black faculty, again, largely in these adjunct roles, the janitorial staff that we never talk about, the tenure denials that we are seeing really intense, we're seeing really sort of intense manifestations of those relationships or non-relationships to Black people. And so I think in higher education, this requires grappling with the processes we've talked about as opportunities, not for gatekeeping, as one of my scholar colleagues always says, but as opportunities for gateways. And I think that this is in conversation, SOSANYA, with a question you raised earlier in terms of what we can do, to interrogate what we are seeing around us, whether or not that is lending itself to gatekeeping and foreclosing opportunity for Black people and Black scholarship, or whether or not it's actually opening up opportunity, whether or not it's functioning as a gateway. What are opportunities to center Black and Indigenous knowledge traditions? Very important in decisions about resources, how they are distributed, what are the courses we're teaching, who's invited to take these courses, are our models tuition free? Should that, these are really important questions that college is going to have to take up, the problematics of selectivity. So there's so much, but I think I might just end my comments by saying there's a quote from Leanne Simpson we've been working with here in the School of Education that basically talks about the relationship of process and outcome, where she basically argues that outcome reflects process. How we do something affects what you get. And all of these processes that we're talking about have to be reframed, reimagined, reconsidered in order to bring about just outcomes.
And I think that it is crucial that we be proactive rather than reactive. We have to stay on top of the unfortunate reality that racial injustices are going no place, and that we will face barriers. So we need to keep speaking up and sharing our voice and our experiences all the time, not when there is some type of crisis. Be proactive, and then we're on this all the time rather than reactive, because when we're reactive, I think we look so passive. So we do this based on our personality and with the resources and the means that we have. But keep the discussion, keep the recommendations, keep the collaboration and more going. It is lonely in the ivory tower, but it doesn't have to be as lonely as it is. And again, as I said earlier, there's nowhere to run. So let's be resilient, resistant, and invade the academy and stay in it.
All right, let's end on Dr. for its final word. Thank you so much. I'm gonna hand it over to Dr. Flowers now, and he'll close. But this has been a wonderful experience. Thank you all.
Thank you.
I want to thank Dr. Jones for moderating this conversation, this critical conversation, and getting the critical feedback from all the panelists. We really, at the Journal, really wanted to set a space and a brave space for individuals to kind of engage in critical dialogue about the experiences of Black faculty. So thank you all for participating in this. I think we're going to put up the slide with our information with the Journal. Me and Dr. Palmer have been co-editors of the JAAME Journal for about a year now, and we're kind of trying to reface and refocus our journal. And so we have a new website, we have a new submission deadline for our spring call for papers, and so share it amongst your networks. It's March 15th. We're looking again for grounded research and theory, experiential research. We're looking for research that focuses on critical issues, and mainly that focus on the experience of Black and brown boys within the academy. And so really share this information, share this critical information with your network. We're also going to be posting this video to our new website. We have a new website with Scholastic, and so we will be sharing the website and the information there. And so if anyone wants to again review and look at this panel discussion, which I really suggest that you do, share it with your colleagues. It will be posted there for your consumption. So again, thank you again to the panel, every member of the panel, for being a part of this critical conversation. Thank you to Nicole and Katrina, our managing co-editors, student co-editors. I appreciate the efforts they put towards this process. And again, thank you to Rob for being a great partner in collaborating with the journal. So once again, thank you everyone for participating, and hopefully we'll be sending out more information about our next panel, talking about junior faculty and their experiences within the academy. So we look forward for that.
Thank you, Dr. Flowers.
Thank you guys. Thank you so much. Have a great holiday.
Thank you, Doc.
You can stop recording. I don't know how to.